The notification came at 6:47 in the morning. Not a call, not a knock at the door, just a number on a screen: $340 million, confirmed, executed, and filed with the City Planning Authority at 6:46 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. I was standing at my kitchen window in a rented apartment with a broken blind and a view of a parking structure. I was eating toast over the sink because I no longer owned a dining room table. The divorce had been finalized 11 months earlier. The settlement had been, as my attorney described it with the careful understatement of a man billing by the hour, comprehensive. I had lost the house. I had lost the savings. I had lost the vintage dining table my father built by hand in his garage in 1987. I had lost, by the court's calculation of my firm's valuation, approximately $2.3 million in projected future earnings. I looked at the notification on my phone, then I looked back at my parking structure view. Then I allowed myself, for the first time in 11 months, a very small and very private smile. Because what the court had not calculated, what Claudia and her father and her brother had not thought to look for, because they had long since decided I was not worth looking at carefully, was the other company. The one with a different name. The one that had been quietly and methodically acquiring land parcels in the northeast quadrant of the city for 7 years. The one that had just completed the largest single urban redevelopment purchase in this city's history. The one that now owned Crestwood Heights, every building, every parcel, every private garden and concierge lobby and underground parking bay. The neighborhood my ex-wife had moved into 4 months ago, loudly and publicly, as proof that she had traded up. She had no idea. My name is Marcus Hale. I am 43 years old and I am an architect. That sentence, over the course of my 9-year marriage to Claudia Ashworth, became a kind of social shorthand. It was the thing people said when they were trying to be polite about what they actually meant. Marcus is an architect. It was the answer Claudia gave at her family's dinner parties when someone asked what her husband did for a living, delivered with the particular brightness of a woman managing expectations. It was the thing her father Gerald said in the boardroom of Ashworth Property Group when introducing me to his colleagues. Always followed by a pause, always followed by a pivot to whatever his son Derek had achieved that quarter. An architect, a man who draws things. A man of careful measurements and precise lines who was paid to give shape to other people's visions and who had, in the Ashworth family's collective estimation, peaked somewhere around his mid-30s and could now be safely categorized as a pleasant, dependable, and fundamentally limited man. What none of them knew, what I had taken considerable care to ensure none of them would know until the precise moment I chose, was that the architect had been building something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with other people's visions. Something that bore a different company name and a different address and a different set of financial statements that had never, not once, appeared on any document Claudia's divorce lawyers requested. $340 million, filed at 6:46 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, and Claudia was already living inside it. Before we go any further into Marcus's story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. These stories reach people in cities and towns we never imagined, and it always means something to know you're out there. Drop your city or country in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story is holding your attention, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories just like this one. It takes about 2 seconds and it genuinely means the world to us. Now let's go back to Marcus and the 9 years that made that Tuesday morning notification feel like the first full breath he had taken in a very long time. I met Claudia at a conference in 2009. She was 28, I was 30. She was working in interior design, high-end residential, the kind of work that took her into the homes of people whose net worth she discussed with the easy familiarity of someone who had grown up nearby. She was quick and funny and opinionated about buildings in a way that I found immediately disarming. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's instinct for a room. She could walk into a space and tell you within 30 seconds what was wrong with it and exactly what it would cost to fix it. I was, at that point, a senior associate at a mid-size firm downtown. I was not wealthy. I had a 1-bedroom apartment, a student loan that was nearly paid off, and a growing reputation in sustainable commercial design that I was quietly proud of. I was also, and I say this not with false modesty but with the clarity of a man who has since had considerable time to examine his own history, genuinely in love with her, not the idea of her. Not the lifestyle she represented or the family connections she came with. Her, The woman who argued with me about load-bearing walls over cheap wine at a hotel bar until midnight. The woman who called me the following morning and picked up exactly where we'd left off, as if the conversation had simply been paused rather than concluded. We were married in 2011 at a venue her father chose, at a scale her father funded, in front of 300 people, approximately half of whom I had never met. I wore a suit Gerald had suggested. I gave a speech Gerald had quietly edited. I smiled in photographs beside a man who shook my hand on that day with the warmth of someone accepting a minor inconvenience. The first years were good, I want to be honest about that. They were not perfect, and the fault lines were always there if you knew where to look, but they were genuinely good. Claudia was brilliant company. She had taste and energy and a way of making a space feel inhabited rather than decorated. We argued about architecture the way other couples argue about politics, passionately and without resolution, and always with the tacit understanding that neither of us was actually angry. We traveled, we built a life, but Gerald's money was always in the room. Gerald Ashworth had made his fortune in property development, commercial and residential, across 3 decades, beginning with a single warehouse in the city's industrial quarter that he'd bought for almost nothing and converted into 12 luxury loft apartments in the early 90s. He was not a subtle man about it. His success was the first thing he introduced himself with and the last thing he mentioned before he left. He had built Ashworth Property Group into a brand that meant something in this city, and he measured the men around his daughter with the same instrument he used to measure everything else. What are you worth and what are you building? I was worth, in his calculation, not very much. I had a salary. I had prospects. I had, as he once said to a colleague within my earshot at a Christmas dinner, potential without trajectory. He was not a cruel man in the way that requires effort. He was the kind of man whose dismissals cost him nothing because he had never once considered that the dismissed party might be keeping score. I was keeping score. For 9 years, I was keeping score. The marriage did not end in a single moment. It ended the way structures fail, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow accumulation of stress on load-bearing walls until one morning the whole thing was simply no longer standing. But there was a specific afternoon, a Thursday in November, 4 years before the divorce was filed. A Thursday that functioned as the moment I understood with complete clarity what I was actually living inside. I had come home 2 hours earlier than expected. A site visit had been canceled. I came in through the back door, dropped my bag in the hallway, and heard Claudia's voice carrying from the living room. She was on the phone. She thought she was alone. I stood in the hallway for what I estimate was approximately 4 minutes, and I did not announce myself, and what I heard in those 4 minutes reorganized every assumption I had been operating under. She was talking to Derek. He's never going to be a Gerald, Derek, that's the truth of it. I knew it at 30 and I know it at 37. He's talented. He's genuinely talented, but talented doesn't build an empire. Talented works for other people who do. A pause. No, I'm not. It's not about the money specifically. It's about what the money represents. It represents vision, ambition. It represents a man who looks at a city and thinks I'm going to own a piece of that. Marcus looks at a city and thinks I'm going to draw a beautiful building that someone else owns. That's not the same thing. That will never be the same thing. Another pause, then quieter, in the tone of a woman who had long since made up her mind and was simply waiting for the administrative process to catch up. I need a man who owns things, Derek. Not someone who designs them for other people. I stood in the hallway for another minute after she hung up. Then I set down my bag very carefully. I went upstairs to the study, closed the door, sat down at my desk, and opened the development folder that lived in the encrypted partition of my laptop. The one with the different company name. The one with the land acquisition spreadsheet and the planning application drafts and the 7 years of quiet, methodical work that nobody in this house had ever been told about. I looked at the spreadsheet for a long time. Then I picked up my pen, a matte black Caran Dake 849, a present I had bought myself the year I set up the holding company, because the pen I signed those first contracts with deserved to be something, and I began to write. Not a letter, not a confrontation, a list, every dismissal, every casual diminishment, every dinner party pivot and every boardroom introduction and everything that had been said when the speaker believed the cost of saying it was 0. I wrote them all down in a small black notebook that I kept in the inside pocket of my work jacket. The notebook went everywhere I went. The pen went with it. I did not say anything to Claudia that evening, or the following morning, or at any point in the 4 years that followed, during which time the marriage continued its slow and quiet deterioration. during which time I continued drawing buildings for other people and attending Gerald's dinners and smiling in the right places, and during which time the Hale Meridian Group continued, in a different name on a different set of servers, accumulating land. The list in the black notebook grew. I let it grow. The divorce proceedings began in the spring, filed by Claudia's attorney on a Monday morning with a comprehensiveness that made clear it had been in preparation for considerably longer than the marriage had been visibly deteriorating. The settlement demand was, I will give them credit, thorough. The house, a 4-bedroom Victorian terrace in the best postcode in the city's west side, which I had renovated almost entirely with my own design work and a considerable amount of my own weekends, was to be transferred to Claudia outright. This was framed in the filing as recognizing the emotional and domestic investment she had made in the property. The house was valued at $1.6 million. The valuation was performed by an assessor whose firm had done work for Ashworth Property Group for 11 years. The joint savings account, $340,000, accumulated over 9 years of 2 professional incomes, was to be divided 60/40 in Claudia's favor, in recognition of her having subordinated career advancement to support the marriage. This was a creative reading of a woman who had run her own design consultancy throughout our marriage and whose client list had grown steadily throughout, but creative readings in divorce proceedings are billed at the same hourly rate as accurate ones. The projected valuation of my architecture firm, Hale Design, was to factor into the settlement as a marital asset. This was the calculation that hurt most, not because of the number, though the number was $2.3 million, but because it required me to submit financial disclosures that I scrutinized very carefully for anything that might point, even obliquely, toward Hale Meridian. They did not. The two entities had been separated with architectural precision from the beginning. The wall between them held. I accepted the settlement. My attorney, a careful man named Philip Osa, who had been practicing family law for 22 years and had seen most of what human beings were capable of in conference rooms, advised me that I could contest several elements. I told him not to. He looked at me for a moment with the expression of a man who has learned that clients who accept bad deals often have reasons they are not prepared to share with their attorneys, and then he nodded and prepared the acceptance documentation. The signing took place on a Wednesday in October. Claudia sat across the conference table in a cream blazer, her attorney beside her, her father Gerald standing at the back of the room, not required to be there, very deliberately present. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. He watched me sign each page with the expression of a man watching a subordinate complete a task correctly for the first time. When it was done, Claudia looked up. She did not say anything cruel. She did not gloat, not explicitly. She simply said, with a brightness that I recognized as the same brightness she had used at dinner parties for 9 years. I hope this is the fresh start we both need, Marcus. Gerald nodded, as though he were endorsing a board resolution. I thanked Philip, put my copy of the documents in my bag, and left the building. On the pavement outside, I put my hand in my jacket pocket and held the Karen Dake pen for approximately 15 seconds. Then I walked to the car park, drove to my rented apartment, and opened my laptop. That was the first humiliation. There were others. 3 weeks after the settlement was signed, I received a message from Derek on a platform we had both used during the marriage for occasional professional communication. Derek was 34, ran the marketing and communications division of Ashworth Property Group, and had the specific energy of a man who had never been required to develop a personality independent of his father's net worth. He was not subtle and he was not particularly intelligent, and he was, in the architecture of the Ashworth family's cruelty, the load-bearing wall that held up everything cheap. The message read, just seen the settlement figures. Mate, you got absolutely cleaned out. Still, at least you've got your little drawings to keep you warm. Maybe design yourself a new dining table since you apparently couldn't keep the last one. Face with tears of joy, I screenshotted the message. I added it to the notebook under the date. I did not reply. 2 days later, he sent a follow-up. Heard you're renting in the Eastgate area now. That's actually quite cool in a down-to-earth way, very authentic. Dad says there's a project management position opening up at APC if you ever need a landing pad. No shame in it, honestly. A project management position at Gerald Ashworth's company. Managing permit applications and contractor schedules for buildings that other architects had designed and that Gerald would own. I screenshot that one too. I replied, "Thank you, Derek, I'm doing fine," 3 words, then I closed the app. Oh, the following month, I attended a charity fundraiser, a city architecture foundation event that I had been a patron of for 6 years and which I attended because my absence would have been noted, and because I had decided with great care that nothing about my external presentation was to change. I was to remain to all observers the same Marcus Hale, quietly capable, pleasantly present, no visible trajectory. Gerald was there. He arrived with a woman who was not Claudia's mother, which had been the state of affairs for some years. He saw me across the room and walked over with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once needed to calculate whether he was welcome. Marcus. A handshake, firm, the handshake of a man reminding another man of the hierarchy. Gerald, how are you settling in the Eastgate apartments? Very well, thank you. He looked at me for a moment with something that was almost concern but landed closer to satisfaction. You know, Marcus, I've been thinking about you. Genuinely, you're a talented man. You've always been talented. But talent without the right infrastructure. He paused to pick up a glass of champagne from a passing tray. It's like a beautiful building on a bad foundation. Doesn't matter how good the drawings are. I looked at him steadily. You know, I stand by that position at APC. The offer is real. No one needs to know the circumstances. You could rebuild from there. I took a measured breath. That's very generous, Gerald. I'll keep it in mind. He nodded. He moved on. I reached into my jacket pocket. I held the pen. I turned back to the room and found Daniel Voss standing near the bar with 2 glasses of mineral water, watching me with the dry, watchful expression of a man who had heard every word from 12 feet away and was choosing, with deliberate restraint, to say nothing about it yet. I took one of the glasses. We stood together in silence for a moment. Foundation speech, Daniel said quietly. Foundation speech, I confirmed. The 4th one this year, the 5th. He took a drink. It'll be the last. I said nothing. But I opened the notebook that evening and added the foundation speech verbatim under the date. The final humiliation came in February, approximately 8 months after the divorce was finalized. Claudia had, by this point, moved into Crestwood Heights. This was not a secret. Derek announced it in the family WhatsApp group that I had somehow remained a member of through some administrative oversight, possibly deliberate, in a message that read, Claude has officially upgraded round Pushpin Crestwood Heights. New chapter, new address, new everything. Dad found her the apartment. Only the best for the Ashworths. The message was accompanied by a photograph of Claudia standing in front of the building's entrance lobby, marble floors, concierge desk, the kind of architectural restraint that costs a great deal to achieve. She was smiling the smile she used when she wanted to communicate that a chapter had been definitively closed. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Crestwood Heights, the crown jewel of the Meridian Quarter development. The residential centerpiece of the $340 million project that Hale Meridian Group had spent 7 years assembling, and that now sat, fully completed and fully leased, in a set of financial accounts that bore my initials on every founding document. My ex-wife was living in my building. She was paying rent, $4,800 per month for a 2-bedroom on the 14th floor, to a management company whose ultimate parent entity was a holding group whose sole director was the man she had left because he drew things for other people. I screenshot the message. I added it to the notebook. Then I called Daniel. She's in the building, I said. A pause, then, I know, 14B. How long have you known? 3 weeks. I was waiting for you to find out on your own. The gala, I said. We're ready. We've been ready for 18 months, Marcus. I closed the notebook. I set the pen on the desk beside it. I looked at it for a moment, the matte black barrel, the precise weight of it, the small engraving on the clip that read HMG in letters small enough that nobody standing at a normal distance would ever notice them. Set the date, I said. There's a room on the 41st floor of a building in the financial district that most people in this city have never heard of. It has no name on the door. It is accessed by a key card that is not issued by the building's management but by a separate security system maintained by Hale Meridian Group, and there are 17 of those cards in existence. I carry one, Daniel carries one. The other 15 belong to legal counsel, financial partners, and the 3 primary investors who helped fund the land acquisition over the 7 years it took to assemble the Meridian Quarter parcel by parcel, building by building, lot by lot. I went to that room on the Sunday before the gala. I went alone, which was unusual. Normally Daniel was there, or at least one of the legal team, but I wanted 1 hour in that room by myself and I took it. The room contains a single long table, 12 chairs, a wall-mounted display system, and a scale model of the Meridian Quarter development that occupies approximately 4 square meters of table surface. The The model is detailed to the level of individual balcony railings. I built the first version of it myself in the second year of the land acquisition in the back room of a studio I rented under a different name, on evenings when Claudia thought I was working late on commercial projects for other clients. I stood in front of the model for a while. Crestwood Heights was the tallest structure in the model, 22 stories of pale rendered stone and glass facing north toward the park. I had designed it myself under a pseudonym that had never appeared in any publication, using a drafting methodology I had developed over 15 years of professional practice. The building was, by any reasonable critical assessment, the finest residential structure in the city. 3 architectural publications had said so in reviews that I had read with the private satisfaction of a man who cannot publicly acknowledge the compliment. $340 million, the acquisition alone. The development cost, construction, and fit-out had added another $180 million to the total capital deployed. The current valuation of the completed Meridian Quarter, according to 3 independent assessments commissioned in the previous quarter, stood at $890 million. Gerald Ashworth had, on 2 separate occasions, attempted to buy into the Meridian Quarter project. The first approach had come through an intermediary, a commercial property broker who had contacted Hale Meridian's development office inquiring about investment partnership opportunities on behalf of an unnamed client. The unnamed client was, as became clear within approximately 48 hours of minimal investigation, Ashworth Property Group. The approach was declined with a polite but definitive form letter. The second approach had been direct. Gerald had called the registered office of Hale Meridian Group and asked to speak to the principal. He had been told, accurately, that the principal was unavailable and that all investment inquiries were closed. He had left his name and number. The message had been transcribed, dated, filed, and never returned. 2 rejections. He had not connected the company name to the man his daughter had divorced. Why would he? He had never looked at me carefully enough to imagine I might be building something he would want a piece of. I stood at the model for a while longer. I touched the top of the Crestwood Heights miniature with one finger, the rooftop terrace where, in 4 days, the Meridian Quarter launch gala would take place. Then I opened the notebook, read through the list one final time, every entry in order, dated, verbatim. Then I took the pen from my jacket pocket and wrote one final line at the bottom of the last page. It was the date of the gala and the time and a single sentence: the foundation holds. Daniel Voss and I have known each other for 16 years. We met in the offices of a now-defunct commercial property firm where we both worked briefly in our late 20s, he as a development analyst, I as a contracted design consultant. We overlapped for 8 months before the firm closed, and in those 8 months we had enough conversations about cities and capital and what it actually meant to build something that lasted that by the time the firm folded, we had already begun the preliminary discussions about what we might build together. Daniel is 41. He is the kind of man that the finance world produces occasionally, genuinely brilliant with numbers, genuinely interested in people, capable of moving through a boardroom or a building site with the same easy competence. He is also, and this matters more than any of the rest, completely loyal, not in the performed, declarative way of people who talk about loyalty as a value. In the operational way, the way where, when you call him at 7 in the morning and say, "I need you to look at something," he is already looking at it before you finish the sentence. He knew about Hale Meridian from the beginning. He is, in fact, the reason Hale Meridian works. I am the architect. I understand land and structure and what makes a building last. Daniel understands capital, where it flows, how to move it, when to hold, and when to commit. The combination, over 7 years of quiet and disciplined work, had produced the largest private urban development project in this city's recent history. He also knew about the divorce. He knew the outline of the Ashworth family and what they had said and done, because I had told him, not in detail, not in the self-pitying register of a man processing grief, but in the precise and factual way of someone completing a due diligence report. He listened without commentary and without the particular sympathy that would have required me to manage his emotions in addition to my own. He simply noted it, filed it. And on one occasion, when I described Gerald's foundation speech, he had said, quietly and without elaborating, "When the time comes, it should be the rooftop." He had meant the Crestwood Heights rooftop terrace. The one designed for exactly the kind of event that required a city to gather and bear witness. I called him that Sunday after I left the 41st floor room. "Tuesday," I said, 7 p.m. The Meridian Quarter launch gala. "Confirmed," he said. "Guest list is set. Press confirmed. The planning authority chairman is attending. The 3 lead investors are confirmed. The architectural review panel is confirmed." A pause. "Gerald Ashworth has RSVP'd," he added, with the precise neutrality of a man delivering information he knows will land. "I know," I said. "He thinks he's attending as a prospective investor. He'll be attending as a cautionary tale. Claudia, resident invitation. Standard sent to all Crestwood Heights residents 6 weeks ago. Derek, he's Gerald's +1. I was quiet for a moment. "Daniel," I said, "the folder, it's ready, has been for 3 months. I'll have it at the venue by 6:45. "Thank you," I said. "Marcus." His voice had the warmth of a man who understood, without needing it stated, what the last 18 months had cost. "You built something extraordinary. Not because of them, in spite of them, that matters. Whatever happens Tuesday, that's the part that matters." I said nothing for a moment. 7 p.m., I said. 7 p.m., he confirmed. The Meridian Quarter launch gala had been in planning for 4 months. It was not conceived as a trap. That would be the wrong word for it, the wrong frame, and I want to be careful about frames because they shape how a story is understood. The gala was a genuine business event, the formal public launch of a $890 million development project, attended by the city's architectural, financial, and civic community, covered by 3 publications and 1 broadcast media outlet, and designed to establish Hale Meridian Group as the defining development force in the city's northern quarter for the next decade. The trap, if we are going to use the word, was not constructed. It had constructed itself. I had simply paid attention to where each piece was falling and declined to redirect any of them. Gerald had received his invitation through the standard investor prospect channel. He had registered interest in the project via a brokerage and had been added to the gala guest list as a potential future partner. He did not know that the principal of Hale Meridian, whose identity was not publicly listed and had never been reported, was the man he had offered a project management position to at a charity fundraiser 11 months earlier. Claudia had received her invitation as a Crestwood Heights resident. All residents had been invited. She had RSVP'd yes because Claudia Ashworth attended the kind of events where the city gathered, and bearing witness to them was a professional and social obligation. Derek had tagged along as Gerald's guest because Derek went where there were important people and open bars. None of them had connected the name Hale Meridian Group to the architect they had collectively dismissed. The name had been chosen for precisely that reason. The meridian was a cartographic term, a line that runs through everything, dividing east from west, past from present. The Hale was my own name, which I had decided 7 years ago to place quietly at the center of the largest thing I would ever build, as a private declaration that I did not need to announce and did not intend to. Until Tuesday evening. The venue was the rooftop terrace of Crestwood Heights, 22nd floor. The city spread out to every horizon, the river to the south, the financial district to the west, the park to the north, and the rest of the Meridian Quarter development below, visible in its entirety, lit for the evening in the particular warm light that good architecture earns at dusk. 200 guests, a string quartet, catering from a kitchen I had personally specified in the building's design. I had chosen one physical prop, not a USB drive, not a printed document. Not a portfolio or a folder of financial statements, though Daniel would bring those. I had chosen the pen, the Karen Dake 849 that had been in my jacket pocket for 7 years. The pen that had signed every Hale Meridian contract. The pen I had been holding privately in every room where the Ashworths had measured me and found me wanting. At the gala, I would use it to sign the final development approval for Phase 2 of the Meridian Quarter, a $420 million expansion that would double the project's footprint, in front of the planning authority chairman. In front of the press, in front of 200 witnesses, and in front of the 3 people who had spent the better part of a decade deciding that the man holding it was not the kind of man who owned things. I arrived at the rooftop terrace at 6:55 p.m. I was wearing a charcoal suit that I had owned for 3 years and had never had occasion to wear to anything in which Claudia or her family were present. It was well cut and expensive and completely unshowy, which was exactly what I wanted. I was not there to perform wealth. I was there to make a record of what had been built and by whom, and that required a different kind of presence, the kind that doesn't announce itself and therefore cannot be dismissed before it arrives. The terrace was already well populated. The city's architectural and civic community had gathered in the specific way of people who have dressed carefully and are pretending not to notice that everyone else has dressed carefully. The string quartet was playing something understated. The lighting was exactly what it should be, warm and precise, the way light behaves in rooms that have been designed rather than simply furnished. I saw Gerald first. He was standing near the north railing with Derek and two men I recognized as commercial property brokers, holding a glass of champagne and surveying the view with the proprietary ease of a man who had attended enough events like this to understand them as his natural habitat. He was in good form, relaxed, expansive, the version of Gerald that appeared when he believed the evening was likely to produce something useful. Derek was beside him in a suit that cost more than it should have, making a point about something with the particular energy of a man who had been drinking steadily since 6. He was animated and loud and laughing, and the two brokers were nodding with the careful attention of men who understood whose son they were standing next to. I saw Claudia 10 meters further along the railing. She was with a woman I recognized vaguely, a friend, someone from her design network, and she was looking out at the city with the expression she wore when she wanted to communicate that she belonged somewhere. She had dressed well. She looked, I will be honest about this, beautiful. She had always been beautiful. That had never been the issue. None of them saw me arrive. I stood near the entrance for a moment beside the terrace's central installation, a scale topographic model of the Meridian Quarter, lit from below, surrounded by a low glass barrier, the kind of thing that makes guests gather and point and ask questions. Several people already had. I watched them point and explain things to each other. They were standing on the roof of a building that appeared in that model. They were standing in something I had built. They just didn't know it yet. Daniel found me at 7:02. He was carrying a slim leather portfolio, dark tan, understated, the kind that contains important documents and is not decorative. He handed it to me without commentary. I took it. We shook hands briefly, the way men do when words would reduce something that doesn't require reducing. Planning chairman is at the bar, he said quietly. Press are set up near the west end. He's ready to proceed whenever you give the word. Gerald, he's been asking about the principal. Nobody's told him. Claudia, she knows it's a development launch. She has no idea beyond that. I nodded. I opened the portfolio and checked its contents, not because I needed to, but because holding it was the equivalent of holding the pen. A physical confirmation that what was about to happen was real, was earned, and was precisely as prepared as everything that had preceded it. Give me 8 minutes, I said, whenever you're ready. The event's host, a woman from the Architectural Foundation who had agreed to MC the launch, called the room to attention at 7:15 p.m. The string quartet faded. 200 people turned toward the small, elevated platform at the terrace's center, arranged in a loose arc. I walked to the platform. The first response was the confused recognition of an audience encountering something they hadn't anticipated. A few people near the front knew me, colleagues from the architectural community, a council planning officer who had reviewed Hale Design's commercial projects for years. They reacted with the quiet recalibration of people updating a file. Others simply watched. Gerald looked at me with the expression of a man who had found something in the wrong room. Derek said something to him in a low voice. Gerald's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted, the specific shift of a person encountering information they do not yet have the context to process. Claudia went very still. I looked at the room for a moment. Then I began. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm an architect. Most of you know that. What fewer of you know is that 8 years ago, I registered a development holding company called Hale Meridian Group and began the process of acquiring land in what was then the largely undeveloped northeast quarter of this city. The project you are standing inside tonight, the Meridian Quarter, is the result of that process. Every building you can see from this terrace, every parcel of land beneath us. Every design specification in this building and in every other building in this development, including the residential design of Crestwood Heights, is Hale Meridian's work. I paused, specifically. Mine. The room was quiet with the particular quality of a room in which 200 people are doing rapid, simultaneous arithmetic. I want to acknowledge the investors, the construction partners, and most specifically my development director Daniel Voss, without whom none of this would exist. I want to acknowledge the City Planning Authority for their engagement with this project over 5 years of consultation. And I want to announce tonight the formal commencement of Phase 2 of the Meridian Quarter, a $420 million expansion that will begin in the third quarter of this year. A controlled murmur moved through the room. The press at the West End were typing. The planning chairman was nodding. I opened the leather portfolio. I took out the pen. and then I looked for the first time directly at the three people standing at varying distances along the north railing. Before I sign the Phase 2 approval, I want to say something that is not a formal part of this evening's program. I want to say it publicly, because the events that prompted it happened publicly, and I believe in proportional responses. The room settled into the particular silence of a gathering that understands something is about to happen and is choosing, collectively, to stay very still. Approximately 8 years ago, a man I knew told me, at a gathering like this one, in front of colleagues whose opinions he valued, that I was, in his words, a beautiful building on a bad foundation. That my talent without the right infrastructure was structurally unsound. He then offered me a project management position at his firm. He meant it kindly, I think, in the way that a man who has never questioned his own foundation can mean something condescending kindly. I did not look at Gerald when I said this. I looked at the room. At around the same time, someone I had trusted for 9 years told a family member that she needed, and I am quoting precisely, a man who owns things. Not someone who designs them for other people. A different kind of silence, the kind that contains recognition. And a third person whose primary contribution to the family's intellectual life has always been its group chat, informed me via private message that I had my little drawings to keep me warm. Someone near the front made a sound that they immediately suppressed. Derek did not move. His face had achieved the particular blankness of a man who is waiting to understand how bad the next few minutes are going to be. I want to respond to each of these assessments because they deserve a response. Not the response I could have given at the time, which would have cost me this room, but the one I have been quietly preparing. I turned to Gerald directly for the first time. Gerald, you told me talent without infrastructure is like a beautiful building on a bad foundation. You are standing in my foundation. The building above it has been assessed at $890 million. The foundation, I assure you, is holding a beat. You attempted to invest in this project on 2 separate occasions. Both approaches were declined. The reason they were declined is that I was aware of who was asking, and I made a considered decision that our working relationship had reached its natural conclusion when you offered me a position managing your permit applications. Gerald had not moved. But the color of his face had changed in the specific way of a man who has understood, all at once, several things that have until this moment been unclear. Claudia, I looked at her now. She was standing exactly where she had been, a glass in her hand, and she was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not shame, not quite. Something more structural, the expression of a person watching the ground plan of their assumptions revised in real time. You told Derek that you needed a man who owns things, not someone who designs them for other people. I heard that conversation. I was in the hallway and you thought you were alone. I want you to know that I've thought about those words many times over the last 4 years, and what I've concluded is that you were right. You did need that. What you couldn't have known, what nobody in your family knew because I had been careful about it, is that you were already married to him. I let that settle. The apartment you're living in, 14B, Crestwood Heights, 22nd floor, is in a building I designed. You're paying rent to a management company whose parent entity is Hale Meridian Group. You have been, for the past 4 months, living in something I built. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because it is a fact, and the facts are the only thing I was ever interested in. Claudia put her glass down on the railing, very carefully. Derek, I looked at him last, briefly, because he deserved the least of what the evening had to offer. My little drawings are worth $890 million. The little internet money you referenced, I assume you meant the blockchain land registry system that Hale Meridian developed in-house, which is currently licensed to 6 municipal planning authorities across 3 countries, generates $4.2 million in annual licensing revenue. You are, as of this week, still managing social media for your father's company. I wish you continued success with that. I turned back to the room. I'm going to sign the Phase 2 approval now. I opened the portfolio. I set it on the stand. I uncapped the Karen Dake 849. The planning chairman stepped forward. We shook hands. I signed my name, Marcus Hale, slow and clear. The same name that had been in the founding documents of every company I had ever built. The same name that had been in the lower corner of every architectural drawing I had ever submitted. The same name that the Ashworths had said for 9 years with the bright, managed tone of people keeping their expectations courteous. The press section lit up with camera flashes. The room applauded. Not the polite, distributed applause of a crowd performing appreciation, the specific, concentrated applause of 200 people who had just watched something be settled. I stood very still. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that because it matters. I felt something quieter, something almost sorrowful. The way a demolition engineer might feel watching a structure he has studied for years finally come down, not exhilarated, not vindicated. Just present, just watching it complete the process that physics had always intended. I had loved Claudia. I had genuinely loved her in the full, complicated, unperformed way of a person who commits to something real. The grief of that, not the anger, not the settlement, not the public dismissals, but the actual grief of that lost thing was still there. It had always been there, underneath the notebook and the pen and the 7 years of quiet work. I capped the pen, I placed it in my jacket pocket. I stepped down from the platform. Daniel was waiting. He handed me a glass of water. We did not say anything. We did not need to. What happened afterward happened quickly, in the way that consequences always seem to accelerate once the pressure that was holding them back is removed. Gerald Ashworth left the gala within 20 minutes of the signing. He left with the expression of a man who understands that he has misread something so fundamentally that the error is going to be expensive in ways that extend beyond money. His instinct was correct. Within 6 weeks of the Meridian Quarter Gala, the story had been reported in 2 industry publications, not as a revenge narrative, but as a business story, the emergence of a major development player whose identity had been unknown. The coverage was detailed and factual and included the 2 declined investment approaches from Ashworth Property Group, which the publications had obtained from sources I had not solicited but had not obstructed. 3 of Ashworth Property Group's key commercial partners requested meetings in the weeks following. Gerald held those meetings. He did not come out of them with the relationships intact. A man who failed to recognize a competitor operating inside his own family for 7 years is a man whose due diligence instincts are legitimately in question. That was the calculation his partners made. It was, by any standard of commercial reasoning, a fair one. Gerald did not retire. He is not the retiring kind. But Ashworth Property Group's development pipeline for the following financial year was materially smaller than its 10-year average. And the project management position he had offered me was filled by a former logistics coordinator from a shipping firm who left after 4 months. The position was not re-advertised. Derek's public commentary on the situation was, characteristically, louder than it was useful. He posted something on a professional networking platform that was subsequently deleted, then posted something else that was also subsequently deleted, then went quiet in the way of people who have been advised by counsel to go quiet. His role at APC was restructured in the following quarter. The restructuring reduced his scope and removed the marketing and communications budget he had controlled. He retained his title. The title became gradually more ceremonial. He did not message me again. I had not expected him to. Some people do not grow. I had made peace with that. Claudia. Claudia is a more complicated story and deserves to be told as one. She continued living in Crestwood Heights after the gala. This was not inevitable. She could have broken the lease, and I had noted the decision with interest. Whether it was financial or practical or something else, I could not say with certainty. But she stayed. She paid her rent on time to the management company without apparent incident. Her design consultancy had, in the year following the divorce, grown considerably. She was good at her work. She had always been good at her work, and the freedom of not managing the social obligations of the Ashworth orbit appeared to suit her. She took on a civic design project for a community arts space in the city's South Quarter that received strong reviews. She worked. She built something. I noticed this without commentary. The letter arrived 7 months after the gala. It was handwritten on plain notepaper with no return address. It had been put through the door of Hale Meridian's registered office, which I checked on Thursdays by hand, not by post, sometime on a Wednesday evening. I recognized the handwriting immediately. I would have recognized it anywhere. 9 years of shared life means you know a person's handwriting the way you know the sound of their footsteps or the particular way they pour coffee, not consciously, not analytically, just in the stored, involuntary way of a body that has organized its patterns around another body for a long time. I sat down at the desk in the 41st floor room before I opened it. I held it for a moment, then I read it. I am not going to reproduce it in full. Some things belong to the people they were written between and lose something essential when they are shared wider. But I will say what it contained because what it contained matters to the shape of this story. It did not ask for anything. That was the first thing I registered. No request, no reconnection. No suggestion of any kind of future transaction, emotional or otherwise. It was simply an account, written in Claudia's direct and undecorated hand, of what she understood now that she had not understood then. She wrote that she had spent the years of the marriage confusing her father's categories for her own, that she had absorbed, without ever examining, a hierarchy of worth that measured men by the visible scale of what they controlled, the kind of worth that announces itself, that takes up space, that enters rooms with evidence. She had applied that hierarchy to me and found me wanting, and she had been wrong, not because I turned out to be richer than she thought, but because the hierarchy itself was the wrong instrument. She saw that now. She wrote that she had not known about Hale Meridian, but that on reflection she had not looked, that the not looking was its own kind of failure, that a person who chooses not to look carefully at someone they love has made a choice, even if they performed it as an oversight. She wrote, and this was the part that stayed with me the longest, the part I returned to more than once on subsequent readings, that the building she lived in was extraordinary. That she had known this from the first day she moved in without being able to articulate why. That the proportion of the lobby and the quality of light in the stairwells and the particular relationship between the building's mass and the park it faced were unlike anything she had lived in before. That it felt, she wrote, designed by someone who understood that a building is not a product. It's an argument. I know that sounds like the kind of thing you would say. She had written, I should have listened to you more when you said things like that. The letter ended, I am not writing to ask for anything or to suggest anything or to open anything that has been properly closed. I am writing because I needed you to know that I understand what I didn't understand, and because you deserve to hear it from me directly and without agenda. I hope the work continues to be good. It should be. It is. No signature, just her initials, 3 letters in the bottom right corner. I read it twice. Then I folded it along its original creases and placed it in the inside pocket of my jacket next to the pen. I did not reply, but I did not delete it. I did not intend to delete it. I have thought since then about what I want to say about all of it. Not the settlement or the gala or the consequence sequence. Those things are finished and they resolved in the way that things resolve when they are structurally sound. I mean the larger question of what this story is actually about. Because here is the thing about spending 7 years building something in private while the people around you have decided they already understand you completely. It is not a comfortable way to live. It is not the story I would have written if I were writing the story of my life from the beginning. I would have written a marriage that worked. I would have written a family that saw each other clearly. I would have written a version of myself who could say, without stratagem or calculation, this is what I am building, this is what it means, this is who I am, look at me properly. I could not write that story, so I wrote this one. But I want to be precise about what I learned from it, because the lesson is not what it might appear to be from the outside. The lesson is not that quiet men with hidden wealth always win. That is a fantasy, and I am not interested in fantasies. The lesson is not that you should build a monument to yourself in someone else's postcode. The lesson is not that patience is always rewarded or that justice is always architectural. The lesson, as far as I can recover it from the actual experience of living through it, is this. The foundation is the work. Not the result of the work, not the recognition of the work, not the financial output of the work itself, done with precision and integrity and the full commitment of your intelligence in whatever room you happen to be standing in, whether or not anyone in that room is paying attention. Gerald was wrong. Talent without infrastructure is not like a building on a bad foundation. Talent applied with discipline over time in the right direction is the infrastructure. Everything else, the valuation, the gala, the signing, the flash of cameras over a development approval, that is not the foundation. That is the building that grew from it. I built something, it stands, that's all I have. I want to ask you something before you go, because these stories only mean something if they travel further than the person who lived them. Have you ever been in a room where someone decided they already knew what you were worth before you'd finished building it? Have you been counted out before the count was complete? Tell me about it in the comments. I read them, I mean that. And if this story stayed with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories like Marcus's, stories about what people build when they stop asking for permission to build it. Thank you for being here. The work continues.